health, wellness, fitness, and everything in between. We're removing the taboo from what really matters in midlife. I'm your host, Michelle Folan, and this is Asking for a Friend. Our sexual and intimate relationships, they morph and change, but does that mean they can't be fulfilling and meaningful? Are you ready for a life without intimacy with your partner? Do you feel guilty because you just don't feel the same desires that you once did? Will a lack of physical connection drive a wedge between you? These are fair questions to ask in this age group because based on my conversations with podcast guests, friends, and acquaintances, this is a reality. And let's not assume that it's always the female in the relationship who lacks a sex drive. But could more communication help restore some of that missing passion that once created wonderful connection between partners? Dr. Jenn Gunsaullus is a sociologist, speaker, and author of the book From Madness to Mindfulness, Reinventing Sex for Women. She wants all women to be able to find their sexiness again by making sense of this incredible phase we call midlife. Dr. Jenn Gunsaullus, welcome to Asking for a Friend.
Thank you, Michelle. What a beautiful introduction. These topics are so complicated and important.
And relevant.
Yes, very much so.
And so tell the audience a little bit more about you. We were having such a nice chat before we started recording, and I think this would be a nice segue into this chat.
Yeah. So I'll give a little history and background. I actually grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, but I've lived in San Diego now for the past 20 years and my PhD in sociology. And I actually first got started doing work in this field over 30 years ago when I was an undergrad back in Pennsylvania because I started going around to the dorms as a sexual health peer educator and doing condom demonstrations and safer sex talks and healthy relationship talks. So it's funny. And that is, something I did as an extracurricular activity because it looked fun. You get to talk about sex and you learn public speaking skills. And then I became super fascinated about how people make decisions around sex, shame, fear, gender differences, what we're talking about, what we're not talking about. So it was actually that experience that shaped my career path moving forward as a sociologist. And I've been in San Diego for 20 years and I have a private practice, relationship and intimacy coaching for individuals and couples. And for the past 16 years or so. And then my real passion is exactly where I started over 30 years ago, standing in front of groups and doing public speaking and creating safe spaces to learn and laugh and feel uncomfortable together around these topics that are endlessly important, but endlessly complicated.
Absolutely. And so my question was going to be, how did you get into this? But it sounds like it was a really natural kind of transformation to...
Yeah, well, because I became, I was 19 or 20 at the time, and I became fascinated about this topic and saw the importance of it right away. Even though, I was raised a good girl in Pennsylvania, I was raised Catholic in a very loving, great, supportive household, but we didn't talk about sex. And I was very much a late bloomer. So to be standing up and talking about these topics was a really big deal and learning about them. But then it's evolved over time because that's where I started in sexual health. My dissertation to get my PhD in sociology was around HIV prevention programs targeting adult women. So that was all the sexual health, public health realm. And then it's evolved over the years. And now where I've landed at this point is what I'm most passionate about is emotional intimacy. And that willingness to realize what patterns of behavior we have and what walls that we have up and how to build trust in ourselves and knowledge of ourselves and compassion towards ourselves to be able to let those walls down and create spaces where others can do the same. And so we can do that in partnership with others. So that real depth of vulnerability and authenticity as applied to sexual contexts is my real passion now.
Okay. I love this. And I want to back up because you said something in your introduction about growing up in a Catholic household, as did I. Mm. And I'm curious how many women out there have had similar experiences that you and I have had where we didn't talk about sex, and having a discussion with your partner about sex can still be uncomfortable even as an adult.
Yes. And what's interesting is even as the younger generations, if you were to look at like Gen Z in their, late teens and early 20s, sex is so normalized on social media and in so many ways, and kink and polyamory and positive body image and all of these amazing things. You'd think that they'd be having the best sex. But that vulnerability piece, that ability to bare your soul and let your walls down and open yourself up and be vulnerable in the way that someone could judge you or stigmatize you or shame you, we still don't have good skills around that. So I would say all ages, all generations still struggle with it. They have their own, it's got its own flavors depending on how things were, what generation they were raised in. But yeah, it's so interesting that folks will sometimes, you could be married for 25 years to somebody and you could strike up a conversation with a stranger on an airplane and something just clicks and you're able to be vulnerable about things you're struggling with this stranger more so than you are with your wife or your husband, your spouse, because you have more to lose with somebody that you've built a whole life with and that you really care what they think of you. So instead of, in some ways we have more safety with those closest to us, but then we also have less safety. It's very curious.
Yeah. And then there's also, we think about, okay, midlife is really great. We're empty nesters. We may have a little more money in the bank. We have more free time, perhaps. Not everybody, but we may have more free time. And again, it doesn't always line up with what's going on in our personal lives.
Right. Or with your hormones, or with your aging parents, or with just random, body changes or sense of purpose or all these things. It's sometimes for some folks it matches up. I mean, because I know sometimes women, especially post 50, post menopause, kids out of the house, they're like with the drop in estrogen and with the shift sociologically and sort of what's expected of them as women, now they're like, no fucks given. Like, it's my life. Like, I'm making the choices. I'm not taking care of anyone else right now. Like, this is my time in life. So it can be difficult to get that all to align. But when it does, I know women are like, I feel so fulfilled and happy right now.
Yeah. And we have to call out the obvious, the hormone issue.
Yes.
And we've covered that topic a lot on the show.
Good.
But when you do have a client who comes to you and their sexual desire is rock bottom.
Yeah.
How do you counsel that person to get started?
Yeah. Well, so what's interesting is I actually see this at all ages. This is because first, let's just say in the context of long-term relationships, I see this at all ages. I've seen this with, say, let's talk women specifically, women who are 25 and women who are 55 or older and everything in between. So there's something specific to a long-term relationship itself, that the neurochemicals of desire, all that newness and mystery and excitement and that things, those feelings that are amazing and make us want to stay up all night and bare our souls, that fades over time, which is probably not a bad thing because we'd never sleep and nobody would take care of children and nobody would go to jobs and we'd be in bliss all the time. So that makes sense evolutionary wise why that would drop off. But then most of us don't know what to do with that. And we think we're broken as women if we're the lower desire people and our partner feels undesired. And then you throw in shifts around pregnancy, post-pregnancy, and post-birth, PMS changes, and then perimenopause. That can be long time period of just shifts in hormones. And so it's so unpredictable. And then your vagina and your vaginal lubrication, all of that's changing. And then you shift that you're not feeling great in your body and there's not a natural boost of ovulation, of feeling desire during that time period. So there are so many factors that get added on top of what we can already struggle with in a long-term relationship that's just totally normal physiologically. But what I keep seeing now as a 51-year-old woman myself, and so I'm experiencing this and I'm seeing this in the research and anecdotally, perimenopause feels like a time period. There's so much powerlessness. Like things that we used to be able to know how to drop some extra weight or how to get the energy or how to get the sleep we need or how to voice our concerns. There's this unpredictability because we are truly, and it sucks. I hate to say this as a sociologist and feminist, we are so much more run by hormones than we would like to believe or acknowledge. Men and women all around, as animals we are. So I would say it's just I was going to say it's a double whammy in perimenopause, but it's a triple whammy. It's a quadruple whammy. And then once you go through that phase and you end up in menopause, you don't know. Women end up in all sorts of places. Some women are actually like, no, I actually have some libido and I don't have to worry about pregnancy anymore. And the kids are out of the home and I have more free time and this feels great. And others are like, yeah, no, don't touch me. Don't come near me.
Right.
I have no interest and it hurts. So it's powerless. I came to that. I was teaching a workshop or a small group retreat a few months ago. And we were all being very vulnerable. And I shared, and I realized at the heart of the angst I had around perimenopause and my own shifts and how they're impacting my relationship is that it feels powerless. Yeah. And that's a really crappy feeling.
Well, and a lot of times when you're in perimenopause, you don't realize that is where these feelings are coming from. No one told me about perimenopause.
Right.
And I wasn't equipped to discuss it because I didn't have the tools. I now, being 60, I've got more confidence to be able to talk about those things that I'm going through and those physical changes.
Yeah.
But not at 45.
Right.
Wasn't there.
Right. And the only reason I had awareness around it is because this is my field.
Right.
So I'm always talking to different people and, a video series I had in the past, I used to interview guests and I learned about it that way. I'm just as connected to my field that at 42, when I started seeing some shifts that I was like, oh, this actually could be perimenopause. And everyone's like, what's perimenopause?
Exactly.
That term was barely being used. And now, just in the past year, it has really picked up steam. So, and I want to say something because it's interesting. So I've been watching this particularly just the last 6 months. There has been a big shift on social media that I've seen and people talking about all of the variety of symptoms that can be part of perimenopause and leading up to menopause. And I think this is invaluable to know that, that weird sleep thing where you're up for 2 hours in the middle of the night absolutely could be perimenopause. Your achy joints in a weird way, perimenopause, and on. All of these different factors can be. And what I fear is what I've seen with other things. When you go from not talking about something and then all of a sudden the pendulum swings to the opposite side. And then it's like everything's perimenopause and everyone should be on hormone replacement therapy. And I don't think that's the right place to land either. So what I want folks is to honor and question like, could this be part of hormone changes? Let me see a doctor, a gynecologist. Let me do some research. And let me not just assume that I could take a pill, put a patch on and take a pill, and that will solve all my problems. So what I don't want to lose is critical thinking in all of this as we're launching into this, like menopause is having its heyday. Yay! Finally. It's finally a hot topic, pun intended.
Exactly. Hey, Jen, we're going to take a quick break and we come back. I do want to talk about those other body changes that we mentioned a little bit early. We'll be right back. What do you control when it comes to your health and wellness? We all know that we should probably clean up our diets, cut out processed foods and alcohol, and get our bodies moving. But there are some things that are a little harder for us to influence. Welcome to Midlife, where estrogen declines, belly fat takes center stage, and muscle mass starts to make its exit. I'm not trying to paint a bleak picture, but the midlife woman's needs are different than what worked for us in our 30s and 40s. When it comes to fitness and nutrition, there are science-backed strategies proven to move the needle and help us look and feel our best now and lay a healthy foundation for the next 30 plus years. It's called Faster Way and is the exact program I used to get fit in my late 50s. Join me for my next group coaching round. Shoot me an email at mfollen@gmail.com or go to the show notes of this episode. Okay, welcome back to the show, everybody. I want to ask you, Jenn, as a health and nutrition coach, when women come to me, they are wanting to get fit and be healthy, but they're not feeling confident and the way they should to be in an intimate relationship with their partner. And how do we get women to love themselves and appreciate their bodies so that they can get their mind in that space?
Yeah, I would, and that is truly a lifelong difficult journey for many women and most women, because there's always something that's, not quite right with our bodies, and it gets harder as we age. So the one thing I would say is shift actually to what feels good in your body. Shift to the actual sensuality of it, the pleasure of it, the sensations of it. Because our brain, if we're trying to argue with our brain in the middle of it, like, I'm beautiful, and your brain's like, bullshit. That's really, and then we get stuck in that battle. What I love is, like, let's just drop out of our heads, because our heads is where the stories of the bullshit that we've learned from society is where that lives. And we will never win those stories. So there is absolutely, like, I have a rewriting our sexual stories workshop that I do with women sometimes. And I actually have an online course around that, if that's of interest to anybody. So combating those stories and writing new stories is absolutely powerful. And that takes time and work to do. And so I do encourage that. In the moment of a sexual encounter, just try to get out of your head and get present in your body. And so this is a mindfulness practice of, I say, tapping into your 6 senses. So your 5 senses that we're used to knowing, but also what are you feeling inside? Because that will then, and then a thought will come up, or anxiety will come up, or you'll judge how you look. And then you're like, nope, thank you. I hear you. Not paying attention to you right now. I'm choosing to focus on what feels good right now. And maybe it's the music you're listening to, or how the sheets feel, or how your partner smells, or the warmth of their skin against you, and the sensations inside your body. What are you feeling in your genitals? What are you feeling in your breast? What warmth are you feeling in your abdomen? What loving feelings are you feeling towards your partner? Truly and it is a mindfulness practice, which is just over and over again, training your executive functioning to pay attention to where you want it to pay attention to, which is your pleasure and sensations, and appreciating being able to feel good and connect in that moment.
And I think we as a gender are harder on ourselves
for sure
than we should be. I believe our male partners, or female partners, I should say that, want us to want them. In the same way. And they look at us as a sexual being, even if we've got an extra 15 pounds, right? I mean,
overall, there's every once in a while I come across a male client who has some issues with weight gain with his female partner, but that is few and far between. Like, by over 95% of, statistically what I've seen over the years is men are like, oh yeah, she's gained some weight, but like, she still freaking turns me on, and like, it's hot. And I'm like, I am just happy and appreciative when I get to be with that body and feel it and feel her curves and dive in. And what they most want is to feel wanted by their partner and to feel and experience passion in their partner. And that's hard, right? If we're in our heads and we're judging ourselves, and if our body isn't naturally, doesn't have the neurochemicals of desire going on, that's a tough thing to manufacture. However, circling back to your last question, the more we focus on being in the moment and focusing on what is feeling good, we can more genuinely show up with positive emotions.
Yeah.
And it's a practice. It absolutely is a practice.
Yeah, I know. But how do we get on the same page? And we're not, I guess, getting on the same page is a bad term, because
tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah, because we're not, men and women in particular are going to be at a different place, right? But how do we talk and have this communication so that we understand that we're not going to be exactly the same?
Yeah, I think I mean, there's a lot of directions to go. So, I mean, I was like, oh, I have so many places I go. So the first thing I'm going to say is normalizing conversations around these topics. And if sexuality and physical intimacy is a topic that matters in your marriage, but not one that you talk about much, I say once a week, I often tell people Sunday nights, schedule 15 minutes. That's it. It's not that long. And if every Sunday for 15 minutes you have blocked off time where you're going to talk about these uncomfortable topics so they don't get brushed under the rug, you start to normalize talking about it. You don't have to fix anything in those 15 minutes, but you do need to show up non-defensive and non-judgmental and compassionate. And each time you can have a topic to bring up. You could be like, okay, this week I'm going to talk about all my body changes and the last time that I actually felt desire, which wasn't a long time ago, but why I felt desire. Like you can find questions to answer. I give worksheets to some of the clients I work with. You could talk about if somebody had a sexual dream. You can talk about what feels good and why, how you like your partner to turn you on, what turns you off, what helps get you in the mood, you could make it part of something I like to call happy naked fun time, where you just cuddle together naked or mostly clothed, and you're just normalizing physical connection between you, but without any specific goals or expectations. What we're looking to do is to build comfort with discomfort around these topics, and so that you don't get to the point, like's happened to me over the years so many times. Folks come in and they're like, wow, we don't know how we got to this point in our marriage. And I'm thinking, yeah, you needed to be in here at least 10 years ago because there's such a wall between you. But if every week or every month you're checking in with these topics and making sure they don't get brushed under the rug. So, and then one important thing is make sure you are focusing on what you appreciate about your partner. So it doesn't feel like you're coming in with a laundry list of, I don't like this, I don't like this, don't do this isn't working, I'm not turned on by that, this is horrible. So really dig deep and be like, when you do that, that feels nice. I can relax with that. Or I appreciate when you do that. Or I like when we can laugh in this. Or I realized I like this position better. I used to love that position. That one hurts now. And I'm sorry. I know that's disappointing to you. But can we try this one? So it's intentionality and it's vulnerability and it's creating structure around it. And then once you start doing this more, then you could start being like, okay, what's something new we could try? And let's schedule a time in our calendar for this week, only for a half hour or 45 minutes, not long. Let's just create the space for intimacy time, or again, like I said, happy, naked, fun time, and see what unfolds when we create the space for it. But it really is, it's a very fine line of the lower desire person taking a leap of faith that their body can be turned on, and the higher desire person really being mindful of their disappointments and their fear of rejection and not being too goal oriented.
Okay.
So it's a lot of reframing and awareness. That was a lot of information I just threw because it's complicated.
Yeah. So I know that you mentioned the couple that they were so far into this.
There are so many walls of resentment built between them and lack of communication.
Right. And I think it's important to point out, and this was great advice, is that it's okay to say, the things that have built up that you maybe resent or whatever that have kind of been a turnoff, but also make sure that you're bringing some positive things to the conversation, because it can't be just a bitch fest.
No. And the thing is, in particular, nobody likes that. But that is one of the things I've consistently seen with men in long-term relationships. They want to feel appreciated. They want to feel appreciated and acknowledged for what they're bringing to the table, and not feel right that everything is always like, oh, can you take the trash out? Can you do this thing? Can you fix that thing? You haven't done that. Hey, you haven't asked me about my day. What's going on? What about that vacation we were going to take? Yada, yada. And that speaks to, something called like the negativity bias for humans, and especially in long-term relationships. It's super easy to focus on what's not working, what's not happening, instead of pausing and being like, oh yeah, there's also really good things. Let me make sure I'm intentionally acknowledging and thanking my partner, or speaking to their strengths, or when they look good, or what you admire about them. So again, it's this intentionality of what you're communicating about and how you're communicating.
I will say men in particular, they may not always be comfortable having these conversations.
Yes.
How do you get through that first step of encouraging them to want to talk about it?
So a couple things. The first thing that comes to mind, one thing that can work, especially if they're the higher desire person, saying, so I know sex matters to you more than it matters to me, and I'm working on this, and this is what this is about. I have discomfort or fear or shame or embarrassment around these topics. I feel guilty. I don't know what's happening with my body. It's doing wacky shit. And I love you, and I know this matters to you. And so this is something I'd like to try to do to normalize us talking about it. So I think often if a man is a higher desire man, and he is the higher desire person in the relationship, and realizes that, oh, this is about having more sex. Yay! So that, for some men, will work. Another thing is, say, I get this is awkward, this is uncomfortable, but that is at the core of all personal and relationship growth. The status quo isn't working for us right now, and we know it. The only way to change that is to try new things that feel uncomfortable until they start to become more comfortable. I mean, that's truly the only way we make any change in life. It's like learning a new instrument or learning a new sport. It's awkward at first. You're not good at it. You stumble. We feel it's a humbling experience. So it's just like learning anything new. So you're learning new ways of communicating around topics in aging bodies and in an aging relationship.
Yeah. And we're also learning new ways to pleasure each other too.
Yes.
Because like you said before, sometimes what worked for you 20 years ago may not be,
frankly, what worked last week might not work right now. Truly, it can shift from week to week and month to month. Yeah, and that's a big hormonal shift, but that can also be what we've eaten, how hydrated we are, how tired we are, how connected we feel, how loved we are, how stressed we are, etc. So, but being able to normalize dialogue around these topics, and bit by bit, one of the things I give couples who are struggling, who have had a long time period of not having much sexual activity or touching each other, and it's rather fraught because one's afraid of getting rejected and the other one's afraid of like giving feedback because then their partner is sensitive and takes it personally, and then they don't like what their partner does and wants their partner to do other things, but their partner like is resentful of having to bring a vibrator in or something to help with orgasm. So all of those components, one of the things I give is there's some worksheets where you actually, in a rather clinical way, touch in different ways of like deep touch, light touch, patting different areas of your partner's body. And they literally give you like on a 1 to 10 scale, like feedback of like, oh, I like that. Oh, I don't like that. Oh, that one's weird. And then you do a version of it with your mouth and with your tongue in different areas. And it's not in the sexual areas, but then if they've been comfortable doing that, they've gotten the feedback, they've normalized it, they feel like a team working together, and it's normal to give feedback, and they want to know what works and not works, and they don't take that personally, then they can move into doing that with their genitals and with their breasts. And yeah, and ideally, I mean, often when I work with couples, this activity will get pushed off multiple sessions, or they might do a first half hour of it because I tell them break it into segments and then they never come back because it's awkward and vulnerable. But the couples that are willing to do it and get that feedback, they just have a much higher likelihood of moving forward in a positive way because they've been they've practiced courage to be vulnerable with each other in that way, and humility as well. And those are courage and humility are incredibly important traits to cultivate anytime we're looking to shift something with our partner sexually.
One of the questions I had was, what are some of the common myths and assumptions made around sexuality in midlife?
I think some of the main myths that we have around sexuality overall just carry through. And one being, we can read each other's minds. Sex should be easy. If it's not happening, it means our partner doesn't love us or that our relationship's broken. Or if my partner doesn't want to have sex with me, it means they're not attractive. I am not attractive to them anymore. Yeah. And I think, no, there's clearly once people are in long-term relationships, they're like, oh yeah, this feels different than it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But I don't know that folks are prepared for that coming in. And so then they experience it and then they're not sure, is this normal? Is there something wrong with us? And so I think some of the myths is like, this shouldn't be that hard, or we shouldn't have to work on this, or it really is this like romanticized Hollywood notion. Like if you really loved me, or if this was a really strong relationship, the sex should work out. There's this myth that I've heard for a very long time. It's shifted, thankfully, but for like relationship therapists and counselors, saying this belief that it's like, oh no, if there's something wrong in the sex life, it's just indicative that there's something wrong somewhere else in the relationship. And that's total BS. It can be, absolutely. It could be related to resentments or anger issues or hurt feelings or lack of trust. Absolutely. But so often there's so many components of our bodies and sexuality and sexual connection that are its own thing. That you can have this amazing, respectful relationship with your partner and you're a great team and you trust each other, you love each other, you've raised kids, you have this life, you travel well together, and your body's changed and you just don't feel like sex and you don't have the skills, because where would you have learned skills to know how to talk about difficult things like this? And then you tried something and it didn't work, and then you tried something else and it didn't work, and then you're afraid to try new things because then your partner keeps getting disappointed and doesn't trust you anyway, so you just stop trying. So all of that is normal. I think all of our myths around romanticized relationships and love interfere with people being able to do something about it.
And we all know couples who are already sleeping in separate bedrooms.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing.
No, that doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Prioritizing sleep and your partner snores or you need different temperatures does not at all have to be, because sleep is truly one of our absolutely top, most important things for a healthy relationship and a healthy sex life.
And I agree.
Yeah.
And we're on the same page there. Or there's, maybe your husband falls asleep at 8:00 at night in the chair, whatever. And I think it's okay to normalize some of that stuff, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's just that, and that may be a very workable situation for that couple.
Absolutely.
And that should be okay. That we shouldn't have this unreachable standard, if you will, that maybe that's just not what's important to them as a couple.
You mean in terms of you being in the beds together? You mean in terms of sex and if they're not having sex?
Not having sex.
Yeah. So, and that is that's always my starting point when I have couples coming in, because normally when I work with folks, it's mismatched desire levels. You have a higher desire and a lower desire person, because it's almost impossible not to have that in a long-term relationship. It's almost impossible to be equal. Every once in a while, you get two folks that maintain high desire, or sometimes I get two folks that have low desire. And what matters is it related? The main question I ask is, do you miss it? Is this a problem? Is this a problem for you individually? Is this a problem for your relationship? And sometimes it is, and sometimes somebody really misses it, and they miss that specialness of connection that brought them as a couple, or they miss the pleasure and feeling good. And so then we look at, is it stress? Is it hormone levels? Is it sleep? Are there other factors going? Have they felt rejected? Are there other factors going on? But truly, sometimes two folks are like, they tell me, I'm like, well, how often would you like to be having sex each week or each month or whenever? And they look at each other and they're like, twice a week. I'm like, do you want sex twice a week? Is your body asking for sex twice a week? Or do you feel like you should have sex twice a week? And then they'll look at each other and they're like, well, we feel like we should be doing that. So I was like, so then as a sociologist, I pull apart those layers and say, where did you learn that? What does that mean to you? What else? If your body's not asking for sex, could we create something like happy, naked, fun time where you're still getting intimacy, you're still getting skin to skin contact? Maybe there is some sexual desire that comes up in that space and you can play with that. But yeah, you could be an incredibly lasting, fulfilling, loving, amazing relationship and not be having any sexual activity because you have intimacy in so many other ways. And that's okay. But there's a lot of layers to pull back to see if that's the case for you in your relationship.
I do have a question. How do you work with couples individually? Obviously, you do individual and couples therapy, but do you do remote or is it all in person?
Yeah, actually, almost exclusively. Everything I do is Zoom now. Since COVID times, yeah. I occasionally have a handful of folks who come into my home office, but those are folks I've seen over the years, but almost never. Everybody, and actually most of my clients are not in San Diego. They're around the US and occasionally around the world. But yeah, everything's over Zoom now.
Do you have a success story you'd want to share?
You know what? It's funny because often when folks have gotten what they need from coaching with me, like they're good. They're like, hey, we're good. I was like, yeah, you guys are doing great. Why don't you just reach out to me if you need a maintenance session or something like that? And then I don't hear from them. So which is great. So, and for all I know, they got divorced, or for all I know, they're living their best life. And so I only know when they reach back out. And so I've had folks reach out to me over LinkedIn, or they send an email, or I run into them somewhere. And so it'll be 7 years later. And this is the most amazing thing when folks are like, oh my God, Dr. Jenn, like literally this one woman said, she goes, I don't know if you remember us, but you saved our marriage.
Aww.
And now our boys are off to college and we're still doing great. And I'm like, oh, but I wouldn't know.
Right.
I've had other folks come back and after 7 years or so, they're like, hey, we're running into a problem again. We've been doing great. Wanted to come in and see you. They'll tell me, so it just delights me. They'll say, we're starting to have an argument. And they'll be like, wait, what would Dr. Jenn tell us to do right now? Okay, wait, she would tell us to use the mindfulness triangle, or she would tell us to do this. So they're like, we still learn all those coaching skills you learned. So the main thing is I don't know what happens long term. Every once in a while, I have clients that come in. It's usually when they're younger clients that there is something that's just a miscommunication, that they misunderstood what the other one wanted sexually or what they believed or what they thought. And then when I pull out and we talk about masturbation and fantasies and their desires and what feels good and what doesn't, and I give them a safe space to do that and I ask the right questions, they'll look at each other and they'll be like, wait, you want that also? I want that. I didn't think you wanted that. And so every once in a while, in only 2 sessions or something, we can find out that there was just a misunderstanding, a miscommunication because sex is difficult to talk about. And we make assumptions all the time and don't realize it.
And if you're a young couple, you don't know how to have those conversations necessarily.
No. I mean, the difference is that younger generations it's much more normalized to talk about mental health topics and relationship topics and to seek a coach or a therapist or a counselor. So it is more normal. And for young men, that's becoming normalized for young men in a way it never was for older generations of men. So there is a more, like I have a handful of clients that are in their 20s and it's young women. Their awareness around their emotions and taking responsibility for themselves, and occasionally young men, more in like their early 30s, is so high. Like the older generations have none of it. So they have all this languaging of personal growth and awareness and their emotions and these personal growth books that they read and how their brains work. And so there's just a much heightened level of that, and that this is worthy to talk about even if it's uncomfortable.
Oh, good.
So yeah. It's very interesting. As a sociologist, I love studying generational differences around these topics because they're truly strong differences between the generations.
Well, I can say for me at 30, I wasn't having those conversations. Trust me.
Yes. No, and for sure, right? So if we're looking, 30 years ago, that was the early 90s. Still not. I mean, we had just come out of the 80s. I think about the shows I was raised on, like the Dukes of Hazzard and the Love Boat, and they were just so horribly gendered and their gender role socialization. Like we didn't have very good role models for talking about these topics.
Well, and then we don't have, this could be a topic for a whole nother show. Then we can talk about our mothers and how they were raised and oh God, I'm not going there.
Yes.
I'm not going there.
Yes.
Dr. Jenn, What is one of your core pillars of self-care?
The first one that comes to mind is something I already mentioned, sleep.
Sleep.
And so I have for a long time known I need way more sleep than the average person. And I wake up a ton and I don't sleep soundly. And then you add in now perimenopause. So, and that I travel a lot for work and pleasure, and some of that international. Like I just came back from a 2-week trip in Europe. So it's harder and harder. And I really need to create cutoff points and try not to have stressful conversations at nighttime and give myself the space for sleep. And know it's worthy, even if I'm missing out on something, which was certainly hard to do when I was younger, the FOMO thing. But yeah, I'd say that's my biggest.
Yeah. I'm right there with you, sister, on the sleep. All right, Dr. Jenn Gunsaullus, where can listeners find you and your book?
Yeah, my hub for all my work is my main website, drjensden.com. It's drjennsden.com. That's the handle also on Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn, etc. So my book's on there. My podcast is on there. Tons of 15, 20 years of information is on there for folks to learn. Tons of free materials out there for them to learn, just like this great podcast.
Oh, well, thank you. And you were a fun guest. I love this. I love this conversation. And I really hope we helped a couple or two out there just to start having that conversation to get them feel a little more connected again.
Absolutely. That's what we do.
Dr. Jenn, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Michelle. Much appreciated.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the show where you listen to the podcast. And did you know that Asking for a Friend is available now to listen on YouTube? You can subscribe to the podcast there as well. Your support is appreciated and it helps others find the show. Thank you.